and thanks everybody for coming today to nerd out with me on risk management. I'm so excited to share all the things I've spent a lifetime understanding in this sector, because as I was putting this together, I realized, wow, I really, really am a nerd. But I think that we should all be a little bit of a nerd, and so I cannot wait just to give you guys a really deep understanding of what risk management is. I called this risk management, aka how to plan ahead and prevent disasters. That's really what this is all about, is not just letting life slap you in the face and walking through the myriad things that can happen to us in a victim state. Instead, it is actually possible to assess probabilities and possibilities and take action to prepare yourself more effectively in order to continue going on the path of living your best life. And I think that's one of the reasons I think this is such an important cornerstone of our learning as we're looking to increase and grow our wealth. So with that, just a quick introduction. I'm Jennifer. I am owner and CEO of an insurance consulting firm known as Quantum Insurance Services, launched in 2012. Of the top 175 producing independent consultants in the risk management sector, only 4 are female, and I'm one of them. So it's rare that you can get this kind of insight and information from a woman, for better or worse. And the more I've been in this career, the more I have come to appreciate the way I can help articulate these things, because I think it's felt a little foreign for a really long time. So I'm also the co-founder of WOW. And AdaPia and I, as I think many of you know, we really wanted to create a forum where women across all sectors just could start to demystify, debunk, share across silos, across all the different areas of mastery that we each have, in order to raise a collective financial IQ. And AdaPia can introduce yourself too.
Sure, yeah. So, hi again, AdaPia DeRico, co-founder of Women of Wealth with Jennifer. I am also VP of Strategy at Alpha Investing, which is a real estate private equity firm. I am a professional investor. I'm a trusted advisor and mentor to startups and other companies in the financial space, also who are looking to connect more deeply with investors and offer what they have to people, which is part of the growing wealth aspect of what we talk about here. Wow.
All right. And let's just go right into it. So the foundations of insurance are super cool, super cool. It's literally protection against stormy seas, and also the concept of pooled risk. So if you think of today, where people who haven't done any planning and are very unfortunate, something bad happens, and then they go on to GoFundMe on Facebook asking for people to help them out. In a way, what they're doing is cheating the pooled risk system, I guess you could say, because they're still asking for the collective community to help balance out the stormy seas, okay? Insurance, its roots literally come from that concept, which is, I think, the most beautiful thing about it. So in medieval Europe, there was always a guild system. And the guild members would spend their lifetimes growing into these careers of mastery. And then they created a system where members would just put money into a pool that would be there in case something bad happened to someone in the guild. So if one of the master's practices burned down, which was really common because the cities were all made of wood, the guild would then rebuild it using money from its funds. If a master was robbed, they would cover that master's obligations until he was able to generate money again. If he was actually killed accidentally or disabled, they would take care of that master's family, okay? Using a pooled risk money pot. And that was in medieval Europe. In fact, insurance has been around since like the Hammurabi Code, which is like thousands and thousands of years ago. But in the medieval times, that's where it really started to have this idea of pooled risk. We all know bad stuff happens from time to time. We just know that there are robbers out there, and death is occurring, and disability and fires. We know that any one of us could be hurt at some point. So instead of facing it all alone, we're going to have a little pot that will collectively reduce the exposure we all have, and then also be there to help whoever is the accidental, unfortunate one, where the odds just weren't in their favor, to then be protected and safer. Okay. I think that's such a beautiful concept. And so that's the foundation. And then the other really cool piece is it established sort of precedent, and then it complexified, it evolved, it improved because it's such a great concept. By the 1800s, there were farmers who would spend an entire season, an entire winter, an entire fall plowing all of the money that would go into farming. And then they'd send giant shipments of, say, potatoes or turnips across the seas. Well, if that ship, God forbid, didn't make it, those farmers would be absolutely devastated. That was it, because they invested to get that ROI once all the potatoes sold. But if in transport the ship was downed, that farmer would just be dead almost financially. So insurance became available as a way to help people who were working hard and creating a need for a situation to work out okay, to have some kind of worst case scenario protection as well for a much smaller expense versus losing everything and being completely devastated, which I think is also really cool. And also there was a sort of venture side to it where investors would pool risk to fund voyages. They'd be like, look, I heard there's a ton of gold out in the New World. Let's help support this guy. He's going to go. We'll all put in some money. And when he comes back, we're going to get some of the spoils. And so they could also collectively pool risk in order to help fund ventures, which I just think is super cool. But again, I told you I'm a super nerd. Then there was the invention of some scientists who learned how to really study actuarial risk. Even early on, there were people who started looking at tables of mortality and looking for correlations between a person and when they died. And they started gathering data. And that's evolved even more over the last several hundred years. You can imagine, with the billions of policies that insurance carriers have, they actually have billions of data points about mortality and morbidity. Mortality is your risk of dying, and morbidity is your risk of getting sick. So that's all that means. And with all that data, it's gotten even easier to dial in risk. And that's helped bring the cost of insurance way down, because they can make more calculated equations around each person's possibility or probability. And it's made insurance even more accessible. And there's also a lot more risk that can get covered, because this kind of beautiful concept has been able to flourish in many other ways very creatively. So there's all these kinds of risks that we have when we're just being a human, right? Dying way sooner than we thought, living much longer than we thought, and not having put aside enough money somehow or been able to generate enough to last us as long, because there's no Social Security anymore, really, to speak of. Another one is getting sued. Professionally, maybe you or an employee has an oversight at work, but there's unfortunately something really bad happens because of it. Getting sued, becoming disabled due to a short or a long-term injury, or someone's texting and driving and bam, something happens. Of course, we're familiar with like our home or our wedding ring, or property insurance. Another huge one is the risk of losing money in investments or on the stock market, because we're very, very eager to chase those 30% returns, but unfortunately with high reward often comes very high risk. And there's actually a possibility through insurance strategies to protect all of those different areas and more through actuarial probability tables and equations that you can buy contracts to protect. So where's my next? Oh, okay. So I kind of live my life by this motto, and I've thought a lot in the last 2 years about why I ended up in risk management at all. And I've been thinking a little bit. My grandfather, I only learned this a couple of years ago, but he had a devastating fire that burned him from the waist down. And this was in a third world country. And the family starved. There were 6 kids, and they actually starved for about 6 years. And they couldn't even admit it because they were very proud and everybody thought that they were okay. So they couldn't really ask for much help. And I think part of that might have just gotten into my DNA, because I hate the possibility of everything going absolutely awfully. Like, I cannot stand that. I don't know why, but it just fundamentally bothers me. So what I like to do, and this Ziglar quote kind of changed my life when I heard it: expect the best, but prepare for the worst. I think that is the most brilliant thing I've ever heard personally, because we know that something might go wrong, but we don't want to be living in fear or focusing on that. I certainly want to always be projecting the best possibility, manifesting if you're into the spiritual aspect of things. I find that preparing for the worst actually allows me to focus even more on the positive, on the best, because it's taking care of a piece that I cannot control that might be kind of like the worst part. So I find it to be very powerful, and I absolutely love this quote, so I'm happy to share it. When we talk about risk management, so you can really understand the concept, I want to explain. We have, for example, driving. We drive our cars safely. We put on our seatbelt. We go to, school to get our license and everything. We do practice safe driving for sure, okay? That we can control. However, we all know fundamentally, God forbid, there are things we can't control. There are accidents that could just happen despite the things we're trying to do to make things go right. That would be sort of like the tidal wave example. That's auto insurance. That's risk management. It's not driving the car safely and wearing your seatbelt and hoping for the best. It's having auto insurance and driving the car safely, wearing the seatbelt, and all the rest. That way, the very worst case scenario is protected. And then you can focus on living your best life. Similarly, we take care of our health. Most of us, maybe eat organic. We try to exercise. We go to our checkups and all that. That's great. But we simply cannot know when that mortality date is coming for us. Unfortunately, that's just the one thing that I don't know anyone has ever yet been able to know or predict. That's what life insurance does. That's life insurance. It says, look, we know it will happen. We don't know when. This protects for when and if that happens, especially if that happens at an inopportune time. In the meantime, though, there's all this other stuff that you are going to do. But taking care of your health is not risk management. Taking care of your health is not going to protect you against the potential fallout of if and when a person has died in an opportune way or time. Hopefully that makes sense. And it can go on, those examples. It's controlling what you can control, yes, of course, but planning for the things that you really could not ever control. Let's say, God forbid, you have teenagers and they're out, and God forbid, one of the teens in the party makes a bad decision and then all the parents are suing each other. That's why you buy umbrella insurance, just because, God forbid, you might have your kid, but you can't control other kids. You can't control other drivers, etc. The idea goes on and on. Insurance helps you organize and control the risk. That's the whole point. There are certain things that are out there as possibilities. And again, rather than letting it just slap you in the face, you can take a clear and cogent moment, do a little bit of planning, get a little contract that's a cost-effective ROI equation for you, and then have some control over that risk that is in your life that you simply cannot eliminate from your life, instead of just leaving things to chance and letting it slap you in the face. By planning, like I said, for those kinds of things, it actually lets you optimize, because then you're like, look, the worst is covered. I don't have to sit here dwelling on that. Now I can focus on upside. And this is exactly why I love it. I think, like all of us, we have a little bit of a control freak in there. We should. I do think we deserve and need to have a sense of control a little bit. And this allows me to, I always say, manage anxiety. It's like, the worst is covered, and that's the most I can possibly do. I'm at peace now. I got to go live my life. And it really helps that little control freak in me be a lot happier and very, very effective and powerful, because it also gives you greater confidence when you're not at risk of being paralyzed by the worst thing happening. So I'm going to share a couple of real stories, because all this is well and good and abstract, but I want to share 3 actual stories, all of whom are clients of me, okay? So you can sort of see the differences. I have a client, this was like 12 years ago, who came to us and said, I really want insurance. I have a young family, I want insurance. So sure, no problem. We're always doing that. In the process, though, she ended up, when she got her approval, she said, I feel so much better. Thank you. I said, oh, good. She said, you don't understand. When I was 14, my mom died. And it was so devastating because we didn't have insurance. And my dad just had to work twice as hard to try to keep things afloat and then try to solo parent us. But there was really no time because then he was working double shifts. And I and my brother just had to really just sort of flounder. And it was the worst. But if we had had insurance, there would have been at least some stability and money. And maybe we could have all just taken 6 months to have like a healing trip to Italy or something like that. And that's why I really appreciate what I just did with you, because I know, at least for my family, it'll be different. That was a heartbreaking story for me to hear the reality of what not planning turns out to be. You know, those real pieces of it are the ones where you really realize, oh my gosh, that's so sad. It's not optimal. It could have been different. And now here's a success story client, let's just say. Okay, and this was literally, I think it was yesterday or the day before I talked to this client. He's a very successful entrepreneur. His business is worth 11 million and counting. He had a dad who was an insurance agent. And the dad, of all ironies, died when he was only 44. But thank God he actually practiced what he preached. So he had insurance in place. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough. So both he and his brother, the kids could go to college. They didn't have to like give up their dreams and, you know, try to take over the family business and help their mom or anything like that. They could still go pursue their own dreams. The mom was able to comfortably manage. She was able to take time to grieve. And then he said, you know, she was really smart. She had another 40 plus years. She was able to take that money, carefully invest it and reposition it so that she still had plenty for the rest of her life, which lasted much, much longer. And the kids could, you know, thrive after they grieved and really appreciate the lessons that their dad had taught them. And I was like, wow, thank you for sharing that story with me. That's, you know, I'm sorry that your dad died so young, but so much else came from that was positive. And I always say risk management stops one bad thing from leading to a million other bad things. You know, if there's a family and they have a mortgage and then one parent dies and it's a two-party household with income earners, and then suddenly the finances are terrible. Well, sometimes what happens is, okay, kids have just lost a parent, but now they've got to uproot, sell the house because there's no money to keep the mortgage, go move somewhere else. The kids are then also losing their social support structure. And then, oh, that's all happening at once. Versus if you've got insurance in place, the one and only one thing they have to do is deal with that loss and heal. And there's no other ancillary fallout because that's what risk management does. And then this is a really interesting one. This is my own husband. So for years, I was doing insurance. I've done this since 2005. And I and my husband, we live healthily. We literally try to eat organic when we can, you know, exercise regularly. And lo and behold, when our second child was born a year later, my husband got diagnosed with stage 3 cancer out of nowhere. I couldn't believe it. I felt like my head was a balloon floating over my neck. And it was terrible. And I called my mom and was like, well, he's got cancer. And my mom is no help. She's like, I love her, but she's like, oh, like she made it even worse. She was just like panicking and something happened to me then because I just got together and I said, Mom, calm down. Listen, I've got $3 million of insurance on this guy. If he dies, I will be fine financially. All I have to do is make sure he survives. So my kids have a dad and I have my husband. Just calm down. And it was really interesting in that moment because then I understood a different piece of the puzzle with insurance because I definitely, having a young child, it was a difficult time in my business. If I hadn't had something to give me stability as a rock, I would have spiraled. I would have definitely lost it. But having that rock allowed me to become steeled and kind of strong. And then we got through it, thank God. And also credit to my husband. He got better, thank God, touch wood. And he's alive today and all of that stuff. And it's been years. So once you go 7 years without cancer, then the chances are pretty good. So that's a happy story for so many different reasons. The insight was the confidence and the ability to think clearly that insurance can find or can create in the midst of crisis. Okay. So I want you, if you can, take a moment. It can be now, it can be later, it can be after this, it can be any time, but you should do it. Take a moment and ask yourself, where do I have insurable interest? So I'm going to explain what insurable interest is. Oops. If you can see this picture of the rock, and I wish this, there, good, it's out of the way. See these two rocks? They're kind of holding each other up. They're positioned somewhat precariously, but they're in balance today. Right now, they're fine. But if something were to fall, it wouldn't be the same. That's what insurable interest is. It's when you're in a relationship of dependence of some sort on a person, an entity, or an outcome, where if it doesn't go smoothly, the results are relatively drastically catastrophic. In other words, you don't want to go insuring every single thing because it's expensive. Insurance costs money. But where are there catastrophic possibilities if things do go sideways? It can be if you're co-parenting and you have children, okay, and your family is depending on the income that you and or your partner are planning to generate for the next 20, 30 years. If not, things would really go sideways. If you're in a business relationship and really without that partner, the business would be very different. You might lose key relationships. And of course, there'd be all these crazy estate questions. Well, now who's my new partner? Is it my partner's nephew from Atlanta because he's the next of kin or whatever? Like, things like that. Try to see where are you in a relationship where things need to go right, or else things could be really bad. Most of the time, it's three key areas: our health, our money, and our business or life partners. And then if you find areas where you are in a position of having insurable interest and it's not protected yet, that's where you should probably go seek an ethical and very experienced insurance expert, and then see if there's something that can be done to manage that risk. Okay, so there are lots of kinds of insurance. Many of you are probably familiar to some extent, but my experience is insurance is like one of those words where people start talking and it's like Charlie Brown is like, wah, 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 wah. So I'm just going to give you a little primer. There's P&C, which stands for property and casualty. This is stuff like E&O, directors and officers, workers' comp. There's also personal stuff like umbrella home, expensive art, commercial properties, property, that's P&C. It's mostly stuff as opposed to people, except when it comes to business stuff, where it's like if the owners or the officers do anything that goes wrong, the business would get sued. That also falls under commercial risk. Okay, then there's health insurance, which most of us know. That's dental and vision. It's also Medicare. There's, anything through Covered California or healthcare.gov. And then there's employee benefits for small, medium, and large groups. Then there's, an area I'm especially passionate about where I do a lot of work. Quantum works in all of these areas, but my biggest focus area is mostly in the life and health space. I have friends, allies, associates, and professional people in all the rest of this industry that aren't even anything with quantum in all of these sectors, right? Because this is my world. But I especially work a lot in the life, disability, and long-term care, and then the employee benefits space. So life insurance stuff, that's term insurance, which most people know about, or permanent life insurance. Now, I say permanent because a lot of people will just say whole life, but whole life is not the only kind of permanent insurance. There are many different kinds, and it's very important you know that. Whole life is not the best kind. There's also a variable life, which I really don't recommend. There's been a lot of evolution in life insurance policies in the last 30 years. So when I say permanent insurance, they're policies that can protect your whole retirement portfolio from inflation, from stock market downturns, from outliving your money. There's even annuities. And there are a lot of cool hybrid policies that protect against both morbidity and mortality. So things like long-term care, when you get older and you're not dead, but you've slowed down and you need someone to help take care of you, that's a big thing. 80% of people are going to face that situation. And Medicaid doesn't cover it. Medicare doesn't cover it. It's a big thing in our society. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into life, disability, and the long-term care side of things. And then there's cool stuff that's even more like specialty. There's contract insurance. So I had a case where a boxer had an upcoming match, and the people were putting $1 million into promoting that in 1 year, but he was going to train for a whole year. Well, we got contract insurance from Lloyd's of London to protect the investors, to make sure that that million they put into this kid would actually, work out one way or another. Even if within that year something happened to this guy, they'd still be able to at least cover what they were investing in promoting. A friend of mine, this is not someone at Quantum, but he's a specialist. He's the guy who writes the insurance for people like Kanye West's no-show insurance. Can you imagine how much that insurance costs, right? Specialty lines for entertainers, for people who have upcoming events. There's always all kinds of things you can do that protect the investment money on the back end of these kinds of things. Another cool use is in prenups and divorce. I'll never forget, this was like 10 years ago. This guy was an author of a book, a very famous book on sort of being a player, about how to like snag women. And he was getting married, and the wife and the wife's attorney was demanding in the prenup that he would buy some insurance to provide for her no matter what, even if things ended up not going so well in the marriage. I thought that was funny. It's also possible, and I've had a couple cases like this in a divorce. If you've negotiated that you are due some alimony, let's say $40,000 a year, you can get insurance on the ex to make sure that even if they die, you can still get your $40,000 a year for as long as you are due. And you can fold that into the negotiations because you're in an insurable interest position. You want that alimony, you put in the time. If they die early, you can't, then you're out of luck. So it's a really interesting use of insurance. And then another cool one is in venture and brand. For example, there was a case where I can talk about it now because now it's in the stores. But Gwen Stefani was in this venture to do a new makeup brand, and they were going to be putting $14 million into it. And they wanted to look at, what if she gets ugly? What if she gets disfigured? Like $14 million, that's a lot. Maybe we should insure her face. It's really interesting. Another was Lionel Messi with an activewear brand. What if we put all this money and then all of a sudden it turns out he did something that's not so savory and nobody loves Lionel Messi anymore? So there's reputational harm risk, for example. Or what if he gets disabled, he gets injured, and then he's not the star on the field that we all love? There's insurance for all of that. And we do a lot of specialty risk at Quantum too. Okay, so insurance also diversifies risk. So there's protecting against risk. That's one, right? And then one of my favorite uses of insurance when it comes to how it helps with money is it diversifies where your eggs are all, like, are they all in one basket or not? So, for example, we've done some Wealth Mastery for Women sessions where we've talked about correlated assets. Correlated assets are, for example, the stock market. We hear about it every single day because everything runs around the stock market. And then there are interest-sensitive products like real estate is a pretty interest-sensitive sector. Okay, when the interest rates are very low, it's really exciting. When they get high, it can be a little bit harder for people to do large-scale investments with real estate and have as much arbitrage. So they're really sensitive to interest rates, and they can change. And we've been in a bull run for a long time now with the stock market and the real estate sector because interest rates were so low. But that's really unusual, and those never last. So the volatility of if we have all our eggs in correlated assets is awful. I will never forget hearing about the kids from the people from the Enron scandal. Not kids. I was a kid when I heard about it. These people had put all their eggs into the 401k, and then it was time for retire. And then there was some fraud or something with Enron Corporation. And so all of their investment portfolios were down 30% just at the time it was time to retire, which meant that their life savings was not anywhere near what they hoped. And there was nothing they could do about it. And I just thought that was the most horrible and awful thing I'd ever heard. One of the most horrible, awful things I'd ever heard financially. So risk management products, when used properly, can be a part of a financial picture to actually manage against stock market risk. And there's products like an IUL, which I use often when we're doing this kind of work, that just create sort of like a slow and steady, can't go down, will go up, will never be as erratic, will never be as high. It's not going to get 30%, but it's like a slow and steady, constant performer with guarantees that are just for sure going to happen, that you can count on, so that instead of having everything in just the stock market, which would be like this red line, you also have this kind of beautiful symphony of products in a non-correlated asset like your IUL or an annuity, where it's going to be slow and steady and you know it'll be there. That way, even if the market's down when you retire, some portion of your portfolio is still high and up because it can't lose the money. I think it's a really important thing to do. And the funny thing is, when you look at strategies like this, they don't have the ups and downs. They actually do much better than the stock market because they don't have to correct for all the downturns. Because people never talk about this, but if you lose 30% of your principal on the stock market, you can't catch up by getting back up 30%. You have to get back up 35% to be back where you were, because the 30% that you lost, okay, is a smaller number now. So even if they credit 30% back to it, it's 30% of a much smaller number. So you're still not going to be where you were. You have to get even better gains to get back to where you were. Those ups and downs, that volatility, you really pay for it. But people never talk about that. But all that to say, it's good to diversify. We've talked a lot about diversification, and it's really good to have something in the stock, a lot in the stock market, sure, and something in a non-correlated asset with guarantees and stability. And then that becomes a part of your overall portfolio. So when should you buy insurance? This is like, I wish people would just know this more. You have to buy it before you need it, obviously. You can't buy it once the barn's on fire. They would never do that. I've gotten calls twice from people calling me saying, hey, my grandmother is in hospice. Can I please get some final expense insurance? And it's just like, who would ever make that contract with you? Why would they ever do that? That's a losing contract. The only time you can do insurance is when you're a good risk and you can pool it, just like in the old guilds before things have gone sideways. That's where you can participate. You can't be a dumpster fire and then try to go participate in these products. So you got to do it as soon as you can and early. Procrastination is not your friend at all. And also, those actuaries are extremely good at math because they've got a lot of data. So just to kind of give you a point of reference on this, when my husband was 30, I got him $1 million of term insurance for $232 a year. Right? Amazing. By the time a person's 40, it's probably going to be closer to $1,500 a year. By the time a person's 60, $1 million will probably cost close to $15,000 a year of life insurance. So time is not your friend. Your youth is your ally. Your youth is your secret to, your youth and your health is your secret to getting better rates. Similarly, on all the other kinds of risks, having clean situations allows you to get the insurance at a better rate than if you've got someone who's got a bad reputation already. Then the insurance carriers might not even want to cover reputational harm. So you have to be thinking ahead, obviously. Okay, so why is insurance so stable? They have to be. They're required to be. They cannot go leveraging. Even the banks were over leveraged because they could. Insurance companies cannot. They must have on hand at all times the liquid to pay off every claim on their books at a moment's notice. So organizations like Salmon's, they're sitting on billions of dollars because they must have it on hand at any second to pay claims. They cannot go put it into like mortgage-backed securities or whatever else, like even the federal government does now. They're sitting now in this time when so many other industries are hurting, they're sitting on so much cash because they have to anyway. They're always in the catbird seat. And they're also all backed by the state government. So even if a carrier were ever to go out of business, the state then has to bail them out, which doesn't happen because insurance companies are very good at math and they have to be very good with their money. Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's famous company, is the largest holding company for insurance in the world. He bought it in 1965 and he credits it as his best investment of all time. It's currently worth over $253 billion as of today. Warren Buffett loves insurance. There's a book called Warren Buffett Thinks Like a Girl, and you should too. I love it. And it talks about his approach, which is just always solve for the worst case first, and then seek sustainable upside. That's exactly what insurance companies have to do. This is how I like to solve my life. And in the long run, just so you know, it's very well proven that this approach will always outperform binge and bust. You have to cover your downside first, then you can seek the upside. The other main reason that carriers are stable, and this, if I could emphasize this one thing today, this is it. In other investments, we're working from guesswork. Real estate, the stock market, Bitcoin, venture, we're hoping and guessing whether it might work out. Insurance is very different. They're literally working backwards from known quantities. They're working backwards from the answers. It's like having the best bookie on the planet. They have so much data that they can solve backwards based on mortality and morbidity risk for the exact probable moment each person on their books might die. So it's like they see all the numbers on the back end. It's not guesswork. There's a tiny bit left to guesswork because we still can't for sure predict the exact date, but there's so much more known certainty in it. And that's why they can provide the guarantees that they provide. And it's very unique in finance. All right, so why does it get overlooked? Why does insurance have such a bad rep? There's obviously the cheesy factor, right? There's a lot of like young punks who know nothing, who are just thinking like, okay, I'm just going to go sell. That's not risk management, okay? I will tell you the other reason that it gets overlooked, and I hear this all the time from very sophisticated advisors. It's complicated. It's confusing. It's hard. It also requires people to think about things they don't like to think about. It's not easy. Once you want a product, you have to fill out a lot of paperwork. You might have to get an exam. It's intimate. It's hard to compare all the different products because it's like people, their eyes are swimming. They don't really know what they're even reading. And also, the stock market is so much easier that most people in the financial industry gravitate in that direction because it's so much easier. All you have to do if you're in asset management, assets under management, being a financial advisor, is onboard a client, get their $500,000, act like a fancy advisor, and then an algorithm rebalances their portfolio for the rest of the lifetime of that client. And you just get passive 2% income off of their fees. It's so much easier. So it's not for lazy people, and it's not for lazy advisors. So most people go instead into the direction that's much easier for them to make a buck. The last thing I want to share is insurance is kind of like hair color. So it's gross, it's sticky, it's kind of stinky, nobody likes it, but the results can be great if it's done well, right? The finished product. And if you do your own research really, really well, or you have a really good expert, then that's going to be a successful outcome. Sometimes, just like I can go buy a off-the-shelf hair color or a rinse or something, if I really know what I'm doing, it can work for a quick fix. So if you go onto like Lemonade or you go to some website and you just buy some term insurance, but you kind of know what you're doing, that's fine. That can work. But ultimately, you definitely, just like hair color, you really probably don't want to do it for yourself. It's better, it's nicer if you can have someone who really knows what they're doing to help you with it. And most importantly, don't rely on your uncle for advice about it. Unless he happens to be a professional. This is my biggest pet peeve, is that people will listen to what their dad or their uncle has to say about insurance when it's such a complex sector. Things have changed since 30 years ago when they might have even learned something about insurance. And yet we endow them with all this expertise. Like, well, my uncle says. No, don't listen to what your neighbor said or your uncle said unless they happen to be an absolute professional. Just like you also wouldn't follow your uncle's advice about hair color unless he's a stylist, because it can go horribly wrong if it's misused. And just like with everything, you want to do diligence, anything you do. So where is insurance on the risk reward matrix that we always like to talk about? All insurance is low risk, high reward. And I love low risk, high reward. And lastly, it just provides stability in life, and that, going back full circle, is something I personally just really appreciate. I really appreciate having stability in my life. It allows me to manage the chances I do choose to take with greater confidence. It allows me to take on bigger risks because I know my fundamentals are covered. Life with insurance is kind of like this blue line. Things will happen, but there's going to be a through line, a line of sight. And without it, it's just kind of like whatever the crazy ups and downs are. I don't know. I'm going to play my chances. So, AdaPia, thank you for letting me just go on and on. I want to open it up to Q&A, but I also thought maybe you could handle these last couple slides and share with everybody, who we are, what we're doing with WOW, and how this all fits in context.
Of course. This is an absolute masterclass, and I know that everybody appreciates the analogies and the stories, because something this heady can be really hard to relate to, right? And so I really appreciate it as well. And I learned about life insurance like 25 years ago when I first started my journey in financial advising at a very young age. And I remember this was part of the CFP, like life insurance. You're right. Like it changes. It's not even close. The products aren't even close. And we even had somebody comment on the risk management side that like you can insure intellectual property, like you could literally insure anything, which is kind of wild. But also for anyone in business, I think that gives us a lot to think about. Like what is a risk that we can insure against? And now that hopefully everybody watching and listening knows that they can reach out to you for that information, or even just a conversation to say, can I insure this? Like, I don't know, maybe I should, maybe I can't, because we get so focused as business owners, if we're business owners, on the business and not necessarily the insurance side. Now, I did want to ask you a really quick question, then I'll tell everybody about the slides and we'll get into the Q&A. Somebody once told me from a business perspective that commercial insurance, like to have a really good policy is a deterrent to somebody who may try to come after you. What would you say to that? Like if you have a really strong insurance policy, that it could act as a deterrent for somebody that may want to come after you. Like let's say a D&O or something like that, because they might try to get something out of you.
I respectfully, I would say it could go both ways, because people savvy know that you have to have some insurance, and they also know that that's what the money's there for. So when you're suing, you're going after the insurance money. Now, the insurance carrier will provide you with excellent attorneys because they're going to battle the heck out of it. If you've ever had a car accident and you know how like Geico suddenly is your best friend and they're like, no, it was the other person's fault. I need pictures. They will do a lot of the battling. So that part is helpful.
Yeah.
It's not, I wouldn't say 100% it's an absolute deterrent. It's only just a protection for you, though, that even if it were to come that way, business will continue because there's not going to be panic. There's going to be resources. There's going to be a cogent team handling this risk, fighting for best possible outcome. And even if worst case scenario, they lost, you lose, then the money will be there to pay for it. And it's not going to be your money. It'll be the carrier's money, which is nice.
Yeah. So, thank you for that. Yeah. That's good to know. Yeah. That's like one of those questions where, someone that I know in business, like, kind of mentioned that. And so to your point, like asking an expert. So thank you.
I will say though, and that's look, what it is though, it shows that you are organized. So if I'm an investor, and I'm looking at a venture fund and I notice that they have their E&O in place, their D&O, their all this stuff. I'm like, okay, good. Well, it's safer for me to consider investing with you, because if you don't have that, I know you're an absolute fool and I will absolutely not be investing with you because you're not even thinking about the worst case scenario yourself, which tells me you're not savvy. So it can also make you seem a lot more professional and organized and having your stuff together, which looks very nice when M&A comes along. And they're like, wow, look how organized they were. They had key person insurance in place this whole time. They had employee benefits. It does work in that way. And so there's a lot to be said for it. Complex answer, sorry.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And so in the meantime here, everyone, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what we've been working on at WOW and how you can get involved. And in the chat, if you want to think about some questions that you might have around risk management, You can drop those in the chat or in the Q&A. Both of those forums are open. So in the meantime, I want to tell you about a new level within WOW. So WOW started as a mastermind, and we still have a mastermind, which is an invite only. It's a bit of our inner circle, like a personal board of directors. It's a beautiful group of women that we open spots to now and again. But because so many people wanted to get involved and might not have the time or the dedication to a mastermind, because it really is, you get out what you put in any kind of a group or a mastermind, even like Leadership Global. So at WOW, we created a community membership tier, which is a little bit of a lower lift tier. And it's really meant to support your financial journey. So it includes the Wealth Mastery recordings, the whole library of recordings. We do our own other private community level webinars and live events. And the really cool thing that we've done now with WOW is we have a partnership with a financial technology platform called Questus. And so Questus provides a personal financial dashboard. So when we talk about everything around wealth mastery or literacy or fluency, like it's got to land somewhere. So it lands inside of this app. And those of you who know me know I love my spreadsheets. This app blows my spreadsheets out of the water because it's beautiful, it's visual, it tracks things, and it's like dashboard. It's amazing. And so it's really a way to set goals, to track what's in your bank accounts, to track your 401k, so you can see, what is my net worth? How am I doing long term? What are my spending trends? Like, it's amazing. And so this is now fully part of WOW for every member that joins. There's also unlimited and unbiased financial coaching. So there are coaches at your disposal, unlimited, to talk to you about anything under the sun. And they will talk to you. There is a moderated community. So this is a moderated community where it's moderated by the coaches. We're in there, like, you can ask questions, talk to other people, share articles. It's a beautiful, beautiful community. And that's all part of the Questus app that powers the back end of WOW. And then, of course, we have quarterly virtual leadership luncheons. So we'll get on video once a quarter. It's like it's an AMA, it's an open office hours. You can meet other members. And because WOW is a nonprofit, you would be supporting our nonprofit mission to lift women out of, a lot of them are lifting out of poverty. When we go and do work in shelters, we do work with children to create financially literate adults starting at a really young age. And all of this is a tax deduction because we're savvy like that.